She had always been admired for her beauty, her elegance, and her quiet charm, the kind of woman who could command attention without ever raising her voice. People called her a lady of class, a devoted wife, a woman who seemed to have it all. Yet beneath the carefully composed smile and soft-spoken words lay a mind sharper than any blade, and a hunger that was never quite satisfied. To those who knew her only from across dinner tables and social gatherings, she was flawless, enviable, untouchable. But in the shadows of her thoughts, she nursed an ambition that no one could see, a desire to live free of boundaries and wrapped in wealth, even if it meant blood had to stain her perfectly manicured hands. Her husband was her first conquest, a businessman with influence, but also with a weakness for her soft gaze and carefully timed laughter. He had believed he was marrying a gentle, supportive wife. For years she played the role perfectly, bringing him drinks in the evening, standing by his side at parties, kissing him goodnight with lips that whispered lies. He never suspected her eyes were always searching, always calculating, measuring his every habit, his every indulgence, every possible weakness that could one day be used against him. To her, marriage was not a union, it was a contract, and every contract had an escape clause. She intended to find his. The plan began with a whisper of opportunity, the kind of subtle suggestion that seemed innocent, even loving. She encouraged him to drink more after work, knowing how easily the amber liquid dulled his senses. She guided him into bad investments, her gentle advice cloaked as wifely concern, each one chipping away at his fortune while strengthening her grasp on it. And when the moment came that he was too weary to notice her absence from his side, she slipped into darker arrangements, policies signed in secret, accounts she could access with a single forged signature, conversations with men who never asked why she paid them in cash. The poison was her masterpiece. It was never poured all at once, never in a way that would draw suspicion. It came in tiny doses, slipped into his nightly glass, hidden in the sweetness of his desserts, laced into the remedies she offered when his stomach began to ache. His decline was slow, almost merciful in its cruelty. Doctors called it stress, exhaustion, a weakening brought on by age and overwork. She was always there, eyes wet with staged tears, hands gripping his as if she were clinging to the man she loved. To anyone watching, she was a devoted wife, breaking under the strain of watching her husband waste away. When the end finally came, it was in silence. He never woke from his final sleep, his body finally too frail to resist the toxins she had so carefully fed him. The house was filled with grief, but only hers rang true to those who gathered. Neighbors whispered about how unfair life could be, how tragic it was for a woman so kind to lose the man who had been her entire world. She accepted their sympathy with downcast eyes, her lips trembling with gratitude, though deep inside, she was already thinking ahead, envisioning the freedom that lay before her. Wealth flowed to her like a river, every account, every asset, every carefully placed insurance policy falling neatly into her lap. She dressed in black silk, her beauty heightened by grief, and the world pitied her, envied her, and adored her all at once. But she knew she could not stop there. Her hunger was too great. One man's fortune was only the beginning. The second came easily, a widower with money, lonely enough to overlook the whispers that followed her. She seduced him with practiced ease, her sorrow painted as resilience, her smiles as proof of a woman who could love again. He believed her. They all believed her. And once he was under her spell, the cycle began anew. The gentle encouragement into indulgence, the subtle undermining of his health, the slow, invisible poisoning that hollowed him out from within. Again, she wept at his bedside, and again, she inherited everything he left behind. With each husband, her skill sharpened. Each performance grew more convincing, each plan more precise, each death less traceable. She was always careful, never reckless, never leaving behind a trail that could connect her to anything but tragedy. People began to call her cursed, a woman doomed to bury the men she loved. The title clung to her like perfume, but she wore it proudly, for it gave her the perfect disguise. Who would suspect a woman cursed with such grief of orchestrating it herself? Her neighbors pitied her. Her friends admired her strength. The men who courted her believed she was fragile and in need of protection, never realizing they were walking into the web she had spun long before their first kiss. And through it all, she smiled, the perfect widow, the perfect wife, the perfect woman. In the end, she was a legend, though not in the way she would ever admit aloud. They called her the Black Widow, a title whispered in fearful awe, the name given to a woman who buried her husbands one by one while never once losing her grace. To her, it was the acknowledgement of perfection. Her plan had worked flawlessly, her mask never slipping, her desires always fulfilled. She had crafted a life where every move was calculated, every death expected, every fortune hers to claim. And so she continued, her hands clean in the eyes of the world, her conscience silent, her hunger never sated. For in her mind, the perfect plan was not just about the wealth or the power, it was about the game itself. The thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of control, and the knowledge that she alone could write the script of her life and everyone else's death. She learned quickly that the secret to never being caught was patience. Rashness bred suspicion, and suspicion drew attention, and attention was the enemy of survival. So she wore her mask with discipline, keeping her emotions carefully tailored to the audience before her. At the funeral, she would sob with such force that even strangers would clutch her hand. In the lawyer's office, she would sit quiet and fragile, her voice trembling as she asked questions no one could doubt were sincere. Alone, though, behind the heavy curtains of her room, she allowed herself a smile, a small, sharp thing that cut through the silence like glass. She was not without fear. Even the most perfect plans left cracks, and she knew the possibility of discovery lurked in every shadow. The poison could be traced. The patterns could be noticed. The wrong word, the wrong gesture, the wrong glance could undo everything. But it was the risk that thrilled her, the danger that quickened her pulse in a way no lover ever had. Each new husband was a puzzle, each life a lock she would pick, each death a signature she left on the world. She convinced herself that it wasn't murder, it was art. The Black Widow, they whispered. She heard it in hushed tones in grocery aisles, in gossip passed over garden fences, in the careful pity of women who both envied and feared her. At first, she wondered if they knew, if someone had finally seen through her veil. But she came to understand that the title only protected her. A curse, they called it, as though fate itself had singled her out for tragedy. And who can question fate? Her fourth husband was different. He was cautious, clever in a way that annoyed her. He asked too many questions, locked his study door at night, and seemed to watch her more than she liked. For the first time, she felt the press of time, the urgency to act before he uncovered the truth she carried like a second skin. She played her role as always, but beneath her calm exterior a storm raged. Each evening she rehearsed the ways she might end it, an accident on the stairs, a faulty heater, a slipped vial in his whiskey. Yet the very thought of being caught by this man made her blood run cold. He would not be as easy as the others. Still, she could not stop. She never could. It was no longer about money, nor security, nor even freedom. It was about the need, the compulsion, the thrill of holding life and death in her painted hands. She was too far gone to return to the simplicity of an ordinary life. Even if she wanted to, the taste of control had become her sustenance. Without it, she would wither. When her fourth husband's body was carried out, pale and stiff, she watched from the doorway in her black lace gown, her eyes brimming with tears that glistened under the morning light. Inside, she exhaled with relief, almost giddy, as though she had survived a duel in which only one could remain standing. She had won again, and with that victory came the same intoxicating mixture of power and invincibility. But whispers were growing louder now. The neighbors who once pitied her now watched her with something closer to suspicion. A police inspector began to visit more frequently, his questions disguised as kindness, but his gaze too steady, too knowing. For the first time, She sensed the web she had spun might be trembling, not because she had lost her skill, but because she had perfected it too well. Too many men gone. Too much fortune gathered. Too much grief staged so flawlessly. And yet, she could not stop planning. Another man had already caught her eye, a wealthy traveler, charming, naive, exactly the kind of prey she preferred. She studied him as she had studied all the others, her mind already mapping the path from courtship to coffin. It was a cycle she could not escape, even as the noose of suspicion tightened invisibly around her. In the stillness of night, as she sat by the mirror brushing her dark hair, she often whispered to her reflection. "Perfection leaves no trace," she told herself, her voice smooth and steady. And they will never catch perfection. She never truly believed in fate, but there were nights when even she felt its shadow at her shoulder. In the hush of her grand house, where the ticking of clocks seemed to echo too loudly, she sometimes wondered if the silence itself was waiting to betray her. Each footstep in the hall could be a policeman's. Each letter slipped under her door could be a warrant. Each face in the crowd might be the one who had pieced it all together. And yet, the very thought of danger only deepened her obsession. Her newest prospect was unlike the others. He was younger, spirited, and reckless with his wealth. His laughter filled rooms, his generosity turned heads, and his admiration of her was so blatant it almost felt careless. He saw her as mysterious, tragic, irresistible, exactly the role she had perfected. She let him see her loneliness, her fragility, her supposed fear of loving again. She let him believe he had saved her from despair. In truth, he was already ensnared the moment he offered her his arm at the ball. But something was changing around her. She noticed how conversation stopped when she entered a room, how whispers no longer carried the softness of sympathy, but the edge of suspicion. The inspector came again, asking about her late husband's health with just enough pressure in his voice to unsettle her. She smiled sweetly, gave the answers she had rehearsed 100 times, but she could see it in his eyes. He was not convinced. He lingered too long, studied her too closely, as though waiting for the smallest crack in her performance. Still, she pressed forward. The young man was pliant, eager, blind. She began as always, encouraging his indulgences, flattering his weaknesses, letting him trust her with little matters that would soon become large. But this time, she hesitated when she reached for the vial. Her hand trembled, just slightly, enough to make her pause. For the first time, she wondered if she had gone too far, if this kill would be the one that unraveled the entire tapestry she had so carefully woven. At night, sleep slipped further from her grasp. She dreamed of her husband's, pale and silent, standing at the foot of her bed with accusing eyes. She awoke drenched in sweat, clutching at her throat, her breath shallow and ragged. She would whisper to herself, calming words, telling herself she had been careful, flawless, untouchable. Yet the whispers did not silence the pounding of her heart. The young man, oblivious to her torment, spoke of marriage. He wanted a future with her, children, a legacy. His words, meant to charm, struck her like chains being fastened around her wrists. For the first time in years, she felt the faint stirrings of something unfamiliar, doubt. Could she truly go through with it again? Or had she already reached the edge of her perfect game? She stood before her mirror one evening, dressed in silk, her hair falling like a dark veil around her face. Her reflection stared back, composed and beautiful, but her eyes betrayed her. They were sharp, yes, but also haunted, flickering with shadows she could not control. She whispered the mantra that had carried her through every kill: "Perfection leaves no trace." But this time, the words felt hollow. The inspector was circling closer. The neighbors' glances had hardened into watchfulness. The young man's devotion was becoming dangerous in its own way, for he gave her no room to maneuver, no space to play the grieving widow once more. Every step forward now seemed to lead not to freedom, but to a precipice she had been walking toward all along. And yet, she could not stop. The hunger was still there, gnawing at her, demanding satisfaction. If she abandoned the plan, she would lose the very thing that had defined her. If she pursued it, she risked everything. She closed her eyes, her hand tightening around the vial hidden in her drawer. The choice lay before her, heavy and irrevocable. And though fear clawed at her throat, there was still that spark of exhilaration, the thrill that came from standing on the edge of ruin with only her own cunning to save her. The Black Widow's plan had always been perfect. But even perfection, she realized, could not escape the weight of time.